In an effort to demonstrate the reliability of the New Testament as a historical document, we considered evidence which confirms that the New Testament was written and being circulated very soon after the events that took place therein. Archaeology confirms the New Testament record as we have it today in those areas which can be checked. One more question remains in order to establish beyond a reasonable doubt the historical reliability of the New Testament. And that question is, what assurance is there that what we have today in the form of the New Testament is that which was penned by its original authors? In other words, since we don't have the original monographs or manuscripts penned by the authors themselves, how do we know that there hasn't been significant changes or errors made in the process of copying over the years? How do we know there hasn't been secret cooperation or deceitful purposes among those who possess the early copies of the originals? This is where the bibliographical test in attesting ancient manuscripts can be applied to help answer these questions. The bibliographical test is applied to all ancient historical documents, such as Julius Caesar's Gallic War, histories of Tacitus, the Annals of Tacitus, and of course the New Testament, in an effort to establish the likelihood that what copies we have are faithful representatives of the originals and have come to us free of changes, errors, or collusion. So, we must consider the following questions. How many copies of the document in question are available? In order to compare them with one another, the more the better. Where were the copies found? If they all came from one place, collusion is possible, but if they're from places far removed by time and location, collusion pretty unlikely. What length of time passed between the original and the earliest copies? If the earliest copies we have were written hundreds or thousands of years after the original, then a lot of changes could have been made and we'd never know. But a short interval of time, or at least a relatively short interval of time, would increase our assurance in the reliability of those copies. What variances exist between the copies? If the copies of a document are filled with significant differences, then it would not be possible to know what the original author wrote. But if the variances are few and minor, then the process of copying over the years would have been proven to be faithful to the original. So, what do we find when these questions are applied to the New Testament? And how does the New Testament compare with other historical documents of antiquity? Let's first take a look at this. How many copies of the New Testament manuscript are there? Well, there's over 4,000 Greek manuscripts. There's 13,000 copies of portions of the New Testament in Greek. So let's compare this with other ancient historical writings that no historian disputes. Sophocles has 100 manuscripts extant. The works of Livy has 20. Caesar's Gallic Wars has only 10 Greek manuscripts. Plato has 7, and the Annals of Tacitus has only 2 known manuscripts. So where were these copies of Scripture? Remember, over 4,000 Greek manuscripts. Where were they found? Well, they were found in various places, such as Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Greece, and Italy, all over the Mediterranean. Such varied locations would make collusion quite difficult and very unlikely. What length of time passed between the original and the earliest copies? Several papyri fragments have been dated to within only 50 years of the relevant events. We have several nearly complete New Testament Greek manuscripts which were copied within 300 to 400 years. For example, the Codex Sinaiticus, found near Mount Sinai, the Codex Alexandrinus, found near Alexandria in Egypt, and the Codex Vaticanus, which is now located in the Vatican in Rome. So compare this with manuscripts of various classical histories, again, that no historian really disputes. The histories of Thucydides Well, the earliest copy of that is 1,300 years removed from the original. Histories of Herodotus, the earliest copy is 1,350 years after the original. Caesar's Gallic War, 950 years removed. Roman history of Livy, 350 years. And the earliest copy is just a little fragment. Histories of Tacitus, 750 years after the fact. Annals of Tacitus, the only extant manuscripts written 950 years after the events in there. It's true that there are some variations between the many thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament available, but the vast majority are very minor, such as spelling differences, differences in phraseology, things like that. Modern translations often note those differences detail by detail in many, many footnotes. Even then, it can be stated no fundamental doctrine of the Christian faith rests on a disputed reading. It cannot be too strongly asserted that in substance, the text of the Bible is certain, especially with regard to the New Testament. That was said by Sir Frederick Kenyon, and I agree with that. He was an authority on New Testament texts. In regards to the bibliographical test and attesting the manuscript evidence for the New Testament not only passes with flying colors, it does better than any other historical document that has come down to us from antiquity. The evidence for our New Testament writings is ever so much greater than the evidence for many writings of classical authors, the authenticity of which no one dreams of questioning. And if the New Testament were a collective of secular writings, their authenticity would generally be as beyond all doubt. That was said by F.F. Bruce. You know Josh McDowell, well, he makes some interesting quotes, comments that are relevant here. He said these things. After trying to shatter the historicity and validity of the scripture, I came to the conclusion that they are historically trustworthy. If one discards the Bible as being unreliable, then he must discard almost all literature of antiquity. Another quote, one problem I constantly face is the desire on the part of many to apply one standard or test to secular literature and another to the Bible. One needs to apply the same test whether the literature under investigation is secular or religious. Another quote says, having done this, I believe one can hold the scripture in his hand and say, the Bible is trustworthy and historically reliable. So to me, it seems folly to question the New Testament record concerning Jesus. Do they question it because references are made to miracles such as the resurrection of Jesus from the dead? Possibly. But that's where faith comes in. We're required by God to have faith for salvation. So the Bible provides us with opportunities to exercise that faith. So we can have 100% faith in the truth of the Bible. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful day.